Man, oh man, oh man, oh man, oh man. I honestly had the most boring weekend, and I look forward to this all week.
Yeah, it's very therapeutic for me. I hope we never stop doing this. Like, allows me to clear out any anger or aggression that I have throughout the week, builds up, goes onto this podcast. And I'm glad we get to talk about the Pistons. Like I said, it's very therapeutic. A little frustrated, though, because the Lions lost. Not going to blame it on the refs. They had other opportunities to pull it out. I'm not going to say same old Lions either, because even though I didn't get to watch the game, I was listening to it on the broadcast. They played with a lot of energy and they played with a lot of heart. I feel like we're witnessing a much better team. But they lost, and it sucks.
Yeah, I mean, Aaron Glenn's got to do a better job, but I don't want this to turn into a Lions Talk podcast. I've been kind of told, stay in your own lane. It's not Lions Talk. We come here for the Pistons, Anthony. So,
Hey, okay.
I'll still tweet about it though. You know that. But I did want to get into this Zach Lowe stuff because I don't know if a lot of people have been paying attention to the Milwaukee Bucks. Giannis has been very vocal probably over the last maybe month or so. And there was a clip from Zach Lowe. We're going to play some audio from his podcast, The Low Post, for about a minute and 17. And he's kind of speculating some players that the Bucks may look to target. So here's the audio from Zach Lowe's podcast.
I think Bogdan Bogdanovic in Detroit is an interesting name for a lot of contenders. He's on a short and semi-expiring deal. His shooting, I think, could it be interesting? Dorian Finney-Smith. Like, I think, you might hear those names as if those guys are on your favorite team, if you're a Nets fan, if you're a Jazz fan, if you're a Pistons fan, and say, really, if one first-round pick and, a decent player, that 2029 first-round pick, if it's unprotected, is going to be considered very, very valuable around the league because of the uncertainty of the Bucks' future. Norm Powell came to mind, but the Clippers have a bunch of balls in the air, let's say. DeAndre Hunter, just like if the Hawks want to get off his contract. And a guy that he might not be worth this package, but to your point about what kind of player are they missing? An organizer, a legit point guard on a team that's not trying to win. I might look at Tyus Jones if I were them from Washington via Memphis.
I like it.
I think the Bucks are going to be pretty active on that particular market to try to get one more thing and really make a better and deeper run at it this year.
So that was the audio from his podcast, kind of talking about trying to keep Giannis happy. And like I had mentioned earlier, that like the Bucks are kind of worried that Giannis might not want to sign a long-term extension. He doesn't want to commit to the Bucks if they're not willing to commit to him to try to compete for a championship. But I want to know what your thoughts are on all those players that he mentioned. But Bojan was first, by the way. I do want to mention that.
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to see. He was kind of all over the place with his players that he listed. He listed a point guard, he listed a young and up-and-coming player in DeAndre Hunter. Then he mentioned Bojan. I don't know. I wish he would have listed some other players, though, that could have been that the Bucks could have been trading. Like, give me a trade package. I mean, I think he mentioned just the 2029 first-round pick, which I know some Pistons fans don't think Bojan is actually worth that. I mean, at this point, I understand how valuable a first-round pick is. And if that's what you can get for Bojan, I think you take it. But I wouldn't mind a player or two coming back for Bojan if there was a trade for the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, they don't have like a great list of young players you can choose from, but like a veteran that knows how to win, something we've repeated on this podcast plenty of times, just a guy that really knows the NBA landscape and has done it for a number of years. That would be something that I'm interested in. But I just wish he would have given a little bit more context of why the Milwaukee Bucks could use a Bojan. I mean, I get it from the shooting perspective, but does Bojan really make Giannis happy enough to where he'll sign an extension in Milwaukee.
Yeah, I think you make a really great point because he just said the 2029 first. And I do have the Bucks roster pulled up, and there are 3 players that, contract wise, it does work out. And those 3 players, you can tell me if this would interest you. You got Grayson Allen, right? He's making around $8.9 million right now. I mean, he's kind of hated. Like, I remember when college basketball was going around, he's probably the most hated, villain in college basketball. But it seems like the hate is kind of just chilled out on him a little bit. But, Grayson Allen is a guy that it could work financially. Then you have guys like Pat Connaughton that's making $9.4 million, who's a really athletic player. But again, it's just like, does a Pat Connaughton and a 2029 first for Bojan really move the needle? For me personally, no. But there was one player on Milwaukee's roster where I'm like, you know what? I think they might pull the trigger, and that's Bobby Portis.
That's my guy.
Bobby Portis in a 29 first. If Milwaukee wanted to do that, I would be interested in it for 2 reasons. One, I think Bobby Portis, to me, just screams Detroit Piston. He has that toughness. He has the ability to, make a 3-point shot. And he's a forward. He's a power forward, mind you. And I think that's one position where I think we can both agree that, yes, we have Isaiah Stewart, but who's going to be that backup forward? Now, obviously, we're going to get into, potential starting lineups in a couple of topics, but is Isaiah Livers really a true power forward? No. Is Joe Harris a true power forward? No. So I think for me personally, if that was kind of what Milwaukee wanted to do, I would be okay with that because they made that 2029 first unprotected. Who knows where Milwaukee is in a couple of years? They may be a lottery team for all you know.
Yeah, real quick with Pat Connaughton and Grayson Allen, Grayson Allen doesn't make a whole lot of sense with how many guards unless you're including Alec Burke in another trade package to create some minutes for him. I wouldn't want them just trading for Grayson Allen and him just sitting there. I think he's a guy that can help out a little bit. Pat Connaughton, I think he's kind of similar to Joe Harris. He's not as good of a shooter, but he brings a little bit more to the table athletically, a better defender. But I think he's a guy that can play either forward spots, especially if you want to go small. Him and Joe Harris are just – Joe Harris is a special. He's a sniper. But the Bobby Portis, that would be a trade that thrills me because you're getting 14 points, 10 rebounds, almost 2 assists, 50% from the field, 37% from 3 off the bench. My biggest gripe, and I'm going to mention this again on the podcast, that I've been saying that there's such a big drop-off between Dern and Stewart to Marvin Bagley and James Wiseman in ability. I mean, I know Marvin Bagley's a good offensive player, but he leaves a lot to be desired. And he's more of a classic power forward than what you want in today's NBA. And I mean, I wouldn't mind him so much if he wanted to play the 5, but he's already expressed no interest in playing the 5. So I would love to get a guy that could play the 4 or 5. So the bench unit at the 4 and the 5 isn't weak. Because there's such a drop off between those 4 players that I think it's really going to hurt the Pistons if, once you don't have an Isaiah Stewart or a Turn on the floor. But if you're able to bring in someone like a Bobby Portis from Milwaukee, that answers so many questions, where it really eliminates a lot of question marks, really, from, and I would rather give him minutes than James Wiseman or Marvin Bagley is pretty much what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Oh, go on.
No, I think what you're saying is valid. I think with Wiseman, I don't want to judge him because I just looked at how many games he's played, and if you add the games that he had with the Warriors, with the Pistons, he just basically completed his rookie year.
Yeah.
The guy has been injured throughout his career, and I think there's promise. I think there's potential there, and I think there's something that Monty Williams can untap. I think there's another gear in James Wiseman we haven't seen yet. We saw flashes of it this year, running in transition. We've talked about it before a couple of times, but I think there's something there with Wiseman. With Bagley, I like Bagley a lot. And you mentioned he doesn't want to play center. And I was like, okay, you don't want to play center. You want to play power forward. Well, we just gave Isaiah Stewart an extension, right? You're not going to start Marvin Bagley over Isaiah Stewart, and I think a lot of people understand that. They understand that Isaiah Stewart is probably going to be the opening day power forward next to Duren. I think the drop off is more on the defensive end of the floor, like you had mentioned. Like Bagley is not a lockdown defender, and we understand that. But you would definitely upgrade the power forward position if this was a trade on the table. And I think if you look at this trade, it's a pretty fair trade in my opinion. I would hate to see Bojan 4 times a year. I really would.
Yeah.
Because I could see him lighting up the Pistons for like 20 to 30 points. But I think Bobby Portis, if you had a combination between Isaiah Stewart or Bobby Portis, I don't think there's a lot of drop off defensively. I think they're very similar players. Obviously, I think Bobby Portis is a little bit more polished in terms of, just his 3-point shot. It helps, playing with one of the best players in the world, Giannis. But I would love this trade if it's something that Milwaukee would like to express. And like all the players that Zach Lowe mentioned, because I wrote down all of their contracts. I mean, Bojan to me and Tyus Jones are the 2 players that contract-wise makes a lot of sense for the Bucks. Like, you're not going to try to trade for DeAndre Hunter when he is owed $90 million.
Yeah.
You're just not. Like, Dorian Finney-Smith, he's owed $27 million, but, he could opt into his player option, and that goes up to $42 million. Bojan is going to be making $20 million, but next year it's, partially guaranteed. So I think that's what's really valuable about Bojan is he's only partially guaranteed going into next season. And he has a game where it's not a game where it's really predicated on athleticism. It's just more shooting ability. And he averaged 22 points as a number 1 option on the Detroit Pistons last season. So I think he has a lot of years left in the tank, in my personal opinion.
Man, real quick, that Bobby Portis contract is, man, he's getting underpaid for what he does. I thought he would win 6th man of the year last year. Just, bringing the 14 and the 10 off the bench. He can play either forward or center. It's just such a huge upgrade if you could bring him. I don't know how realistic the trade is, though, for the Milwaukee Bucks. I mean, it seems like getting Bobby Portis and a 1st-round pick for Bojan is impossible. Does not seem like the stars would align that way, but I would 100% take that trade in a heartbeat. I mean, it's so crazy how popular Bojan is, though, too, right? Like, we've talked about him pretty much like every other podcast and some other trade scenario, whether it's Dallas, New York, now Milwaukee, and we have a few more trades later on in the podcast as well that feature him. He's just such a popular player that I don't know what the chances of him being traded are, though. Like, it just seems like we're talking about it and nothing's ever going to happen. I really feel like he's going to be on the Pistons this season. But if you can get a Bobby Portis or some player of that caliber to really upgrade that 4 and 5 position off the bench, you got to take it. I just don't think it happens right away, though, before the season starts.
Yeah, I mean, Urban Alien 247 said that the Lakers wanted him bad. And I've made jokes like you're probably gonna see like Cam Reddish, Jackson Hayes like trade scenarios. Like I can already like envision it. Kind of reminds me of like the Derrick Rose where they wanted to give us like Caruso from a few years ago. But it's kind of like, the Lakers like old reliable trade offer. But I thought this was interesting. Same. Especially for off-season talk. We're still in September. Basketball is going to be coming up pretty quickly. Within the next couple of weeks, we're going to have training camp. And we're going to have preseason games, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I think it's like, 21 days away from training camp or something? Somewhere around there. Okay, let's talk about the starting lineup. You posted this. I am shocked that I've never thought of this as a starting lineup, but you have Cade, Ivy in the backcourt, Ausar at the 3, then Isaiah Stewart at the 4, then Jalen Duren at the 5. Pretty much the Rico Hines lineup we've been seeing during the offseason. I love this lineup. The only thing I dislike about this lineup, and I've just talked about this on the last segment, is I think if you go in with this roster to start the season, I still would like to see Isaiah Stewart come off the bench because he can play the 4 or the 5. He's not as athletic as Duren, but he still brings the defensive chops, and he also gives you another look offensively. And it still gives the Pistons an opportunity to bring James Wiseman along slowly and not throw him in the fire right away. Because like you just said in our last segment, he's pretty much just got done with his rookie year with how many games he's played. He's still untested. There's still the ceiling has not been reached for him. I would just like to see either an upgrade like we were just talking about, or Isaiah Stewart come off the bench and play in either the 4 or the 5 behind Duren or Bojan. But I don't mind this starting lineup. Like, I do actually love it, and I think this could potentially be the starting lineup of the future. It's just it's such a drop-off between Duren and Stewart to Bagley and Wiseman that I would rather have Stewart come off the bench than start. That's just my 2 cents, though.
Well, I did have some notes, some pros and cons, and
okay.
Before, I know you said like Bagley and Wiseman. I have a hot take for you. I don't think Bagley cracks a 10-man rotation.
Ooh, I like that.
Don't. I think Livers gets the backup 4 spot. But these are some pros for me. Why I think Ausar could start at small forward. I think defensively the Pistons get better. I think both of us can agree the Pistons were one of the worst defensive teams in the NBA last year. And I think asserting Ausar at the small forward position, they instantly get better. That was one of the pros I had. The second pro I had is you can hide Cade and Ivy when you're switching with Cade. Not saying Cade and Ivy needs to be hidden defensively, but Ausar is quick enough, strong enough where he could switch and you can kind of hide Ivy on the defensive end of the floor. I think that's another pro I had with him. The third note I had was the transition game. It'll be very noticeable. We saw it in the summer league. We saw it a little bit in the Rico Hines. We saw kind of point Ausar where he was pushing the tempo. He's looking for Cade and he was looking for Ivy. I think having another guy that likes to push the pace will help create easier points in transition. And the fourth pro I had of starting Ausar is you're going to have another playmaker out there with Cade Cunningham and Cade and Ivy. And I think Ausar, a lot of people, they're like, he's a really good defender. But I think his passing is a part of his game where the more I look at it, it's just like, I think that's an elite skill to be able to make those reads and be able to push the pace at that small forward position. And I think having more playmakers out there can really help create easier baskets. And for me, I think those are the 4 pros that I have. And I'll read you my 2 cons and maybe you can kind of add anything to it. I think a con for, starting Ausar is the lack of spacing. We both know that that's the next step in his development is the 3-point shot, right? I'm not saying that jump shot is broken because he has put in a lot of work into it. I really believe in the jump shot. I just think it needs a little bit more time to develop over the next couple of seasons. But I think the lack of spacing for me is maybe why he doesn't start off right away. And the only other con I could really think of off the top of my head is, he's still a rookie. It's going to be a learning curve to, play against the best small forwards night in and night out.
Yeah, the spacing is the biggest issue, but with all of the other pros you just gave, like his defense and his playmaking, him running in transition, I like him more with Cade and Jaden Ivey because of those pros. And I think with those 2 on the floor, even though there's not a ton of great shooting from them either, even though Ivy was a 37% 3-point shooter on catch and shoot last season, I don't know if that was the full season or just the second half, but we've already talked about how much his shooting has improved. I just think all those pros outweigh that negative, which is the spacing. And maybe this is kind of crazy to say, but I think Ausar would look worse with the second unit because I feel like he would have more responsibilities with those guys versus playing with Cade and Ivy, who can take the pressure off of him, where he can excel in those things like defense, like in transition, and being a secondary playmaker off of those guys. But if you put him in the second unit where you might ask him to carry more of the offensive load, he might struggle. So I would rather see him start. But I have no issue with him starting. I hope he is the starter day one. It's just that 4 position, man. Like, I feel like the Pistons, they got a good thing going because they have the core, but I feel like they're a little top heavy. And I don't know, man. Like I've already said before, it's such a drop off. I would rather just go with Isaiah Stewart off the bench out of this lineup and go with Bojan and Ausar at the 3 and the 4 spots to start the season. Because, yeah, and I mean, I know Bojan he's not a great defender, but he gives you the spacing that you need. And I think Ausar, defensively and how quickly he can recover on that end, he could cover up some of the weaknesses that Bojan has. Maybe those two together on the floor, they can outweigh each other for the strengths and the weaknesses that they each bring. But yeah, there's no real great starting lineup for this team. I mean, honestly, the one we're talking about might be the best one you can have. It's just that I strongly believe if you start Isaiah Stewart, it's just, I mean, the drop off in talent is just too great. And I think they'll get exposed more playing James Wiseman and Marvin Bagley bigger minutes at the 4 or the 5 spot than they would with Bojan starting at the 4.
Yeah, so here's my thing with that. I think that a lot of people look at the Pistons roster, right? So I did a 10-man rotation prediction that I put out this week. And I'm looking at the bench, and I'm like, okay, Monte Morris at point. I think we can agree there. Yep. Shooting guard, Alec Burks.
Yep.
Okay. You got, a 38% three-point shooter in Monte, and then you got one of the best bench scorers in Alec Burks as your backcourt. I'm like, cool. And then small forward gets interesting, and you're like, well, have Ausar, play at the second unit. To me, I believe the second unit is going to be similar to last season, where it's just a strength of the team, and they're going to really help carry the starting unit in games. Because I think if, let's say Ausar does play with the second unit, again, you're going to have 2 primary playmakers, Monte Morris and Ausar Thompson. Now, the backup forward position, to me, I think there's so much of the debate. It's, are you playing Bagley? Are you playing Joe Harris? I don't know. I don't even know if Joe Harris is going to crack the rotation, to be honest with you. Because he's not playing shooting guard over Alec Burks, and he's not starting over Ausar at the 3. And if you look at Joe Harris, throughout his career, he's played shooting guard and small forward, so I don't even know why the hell we traded for him. But that's another topic for another day. And I think the center is going to be James Wiseman. I think James Wiseman will back up Duren. I honestly believe that. But to get back to your question with the Ausar thing, I think Ausar, to me, it doesn't hurt putting him in the starting lineup. And I do want to give James Edwards some credit, because he had touched on this in an article, I think, late last week, talking about how the Oklahoma City Thunder kind of already do this with Lou Dort and Jalen Williams, where, it might not make sense when you look at the roster on paper, like the starting 5 on paper, like there's no spacing, but OKC makes it work because they have SGA, right?
Yeah.
And I think the Pistons can kind of have a similar effect. Like, you have Cade Cunningham, you have Cade and Ivy. The pick and roll is going to be so great with Duren out there. There's going to be open space. And I think Ausar is a smart enough player to, find cutting lanes to the basket. I think he's a smart enough player where he could hit a corner 3. Not saying he's going to knock down like 50% of them, but I think he's capable. I think I would rather lean on defense as a team, because I know I can get a stop, Yeah. And I think that's my main reason. Like I said, it's a potential starting lineup. It's not official. It's just kind of my type of prediction that I have. I think Ausar at the 3 and Stewart at the 4. I think defensively, it makes a lot of sense for this team. And I know there's not a floor spacer out there, but if you had freaking Monte Morris, Alec Burks, and Bojan off your bench, holy shit, that is lethal. That is lethal.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I do like the starting lineup, and I think if Isaiah Stewart takes the leap three-point shooting that we think he will take, like around 34, 35%, that's going to open things up. And I think you're right as well. I think Ausar could hit an open corner three, and I think that will probably be a responsibility, and that will probably be something we see more from him, taking those shots. It's just I just like Stewart's energy. I like his defensive versatility. I like what he brings offensively. And I think this season you'll get more from him if he's running in the second unit with Monte Morrison and Alec Burks than him. I mean, I think he's going to be great no matter what, starting or coming off the bench. And really it depends on how you finish the games. It's just I think teams won't fear us once you take Duren off the bench and like, oh, James Wiseman, yeah, the former overall 2 pick that hasn't lived up to the potential yet. I mean, he's not blocking shots. He's kind of a weak rebounder. He gets tunnel vision offensively. There's still a lot of room for him to grow, and I do like James Wiseman. I've talked positively about him on this podcast. Just give me Isaiah Stewart off the bench behind Duren for this upcoming season, even if it's just for a little while until James Wiseman figures it out like we think he can. Then move Isaiah Stewart to the starting lineup. But either way, I don't hate this starting lineup, and I'm not going to complain if this is the day one starting 5. Like, I think this is a much better starting 5 than we've seen in the past couple of seasons. Like this is something you can build on, those 5. That seems like they could be the starters for the next 6 seasons in Detroit, and you could be happy with those guys. But just for this upcoming season, just because there's such a big drop-off at the 4 and 5s, I'd rather see Isaiah Stewart come off the bench and have Bojan start.
Yeah, I just know how invested they are in Isaiah Stewart. And I think a lot of people have that opinion with you. I don't think you're like in the dark. I think there are some people among, Pistons Twitter where they'd rather see Stewart off the bench. But we can go on to the next topic, but I just got to say this, dude. Like Bojan at the 4, I think just from a rebounding standpoint, it's gross.
Oh, it's terrible.
It's like, come on, Bojan. Like, I'd rather put Ausar at the 4 and Bojan at the 3. Like, come on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my other thing is because Bojan, the only time he ever came off the bench was early in his career when he was with Brooklyn. He played 212 games and 120 of them he started. So he came off the bench for almost 100 games in Brooklyn. And then in Utah, because I think people, for some reason, some fans got it in their head that he came off the bench in Utah. He played 204 games and started 204 games in Utah. When he was with Indiana for 2 years, he played 161 games and started 161 games. The only team he ever came off the bench for, and it was only 26 games, was when he had that short stint in Washington. So I don't know how good of maybe there's a reason he's always started. Maybe he performs better starting versus coming off the bench. But I don't know. I just don't think the answer is let's throw Bojan on the bench and he'll be the 6th man, because he's never really done it in his career other than for a little while in Brooklyn and then 26 games in Washington. He's always been a starter. So I don't know, how well he'll play off the bench for the Pistons, especially at 33, 34 years old, however old he is now. It's going to be crazy.
I just don't think that they're going to rely on him as much. I don't think that he's going to be playing like 36, 37 minutes a game. But I think it's fair that you do bring up that, he hasn't really come off the bench outside of the 2 teams that you mentioned, which were Washington and Brooklyn. I think if you look at that Washington team and you look at the roster, you're like, okay, I understand it. That was a deep team. I think that was the year that Washington went to the Eastern Conference Finals, I believe. They have just a really deep team that year. But I'm not opposed to starting Bojan at the small forward. This is just a topic that I wanted to talk about because I think it's something that Pistons fans should monitor. Now, obviously, Ausar was, a 5th overall draft pick. And I think they're really going to lean on him. I think there will be games where Ausar is going to be closing the game defensively if it's close. And I think a lot of people they take so much stock into who's starting and who comes off the bench. But if you look at a lot of games, just not only in Pistons games, just games around the NBA, a lot of bench players closes games. Like, it doesn't matter if you're starting or coming off the bench. I want to know who's closing the game, and I think Ausar to me is going to be closing a lot of games for the Pistons because they're going to need someone to make stops, and I think athletically it makes so much sense. But didn't want to spend too much time on this topic, but I think it's a topic that a lot of Pistons fans have very strong opinions about, and I absolutely love everyone in the comment section right now telling me that I'm a dumbass, agreeing with you, a Stewart off the bench. Absolutely love it. That's what the comment section's for. But I did want to move on to the next topic. Got to give a shout out to our guy Cameron. He had tagged me in a post, and we talked about this right after the draft. Yeah. And we were like, what trades can the Pistons get for that 5th pick? And we heard about the Atlanta Hawks. Like, they were going to offer 15 and DeAndre Hunter. And Jake Fisher put out a piece that Bleacher Report kind of like gave him credit, saying that the Pistons and the Pacers are still 2 teams that are very interested in DeAndre Hunter. So my question to you would be is, given what you know about DeAndre Hunter, given the contract, we talked about it, he's owed around 89, 90 million for the next couple of years. Should the Pistons pull the trigger? Should they try to trade for DeAndre Hunter?
I've been harder on DeAndre Hunter. I don't know a ton about his game. I know he's kind of like more of a 3-and-D player, I believe, but I hate that contract for what he is, man. Like, and I'm all about players getting paid. He is making $20 million a year, up to 24 the final year. But the thing that I'm looking at the most is the percentage of the cap it takes up, and it's taking roughly 15% of the cap, which is that's. And we were complaining about Isaiah Stewart's contract, and his is taking, I think, like 10% or less than the overall salary cap. DeAndre Hunter is a good player, but I don't like the contract, and I think it's odd that Atlanta is always looking to trade him. Like, he's always in trade rumors. Like, because if he was such an integral piece to what they're doing, he wouldn't be in those rumors. So it kind of makes me weary a little bit about him, but he's not going to be an all-star. I think he's going to be one of those players that, as he continues to play throughout his career, he's a marginal role player that can fill it up. I don't know what any of his elite skills are. I mean, if it's scoring, okay, you don't really need that. If it's defense, it doesn't seem like he's too much of a standout on that position. Like, he seems like he's average to good. So, again, I just don't know too much about DeAndre Hunter as a player, but I don't know. There are other players around his age and around what he's getting paid for that have more of an elite skill set that I would be willing to take a chance on for the Detroit Pistons versus DeAndre Hunter.
So a little about him for people that don't know. He's 6'8". He plays a small forward position. This year with the Hawks, he put up 15 points, 4 rebounds, 1 assist, shot 46% from the field and 35% from 3. Okay. So he's your prototypical 3-and-D wing, right? And I don't hate that he got paid. Shout out to him for his agent for getting paid what he's getting paid. My thing is this, right? I think if the Pistons weren't really sold on Ausar Thompson and they made that trade with the Hawks on draft night where you got the 15th overall pick on DeAndre Hunter and you're like, I need a 3-and-D wing. They can shoot 35% from 3 right now. Sure, make the trade. But I think the Pistons not accepting this trade to me told me that they think more highly of Ausar in the long term than they would of DeAndre Hunter. I think the player that he is exactly what the Pistons are missing. But contract-wise, you have to kind of think in the back of your head. I got Cade's rookie extension coming up, followed by Cade and Ivy. Then you want to lock down Jalen Duren. What are you doing with Wiseman? What are you going to do in free agency? Bojan's contract is going to be coming up. I think there's a world where you could trade for him, but at the same time, he's one of those players where he can give you 30 one night, and other nights he gives you 10. The consistency just hasn't been there with him so far throughout his young NBA career. But I think if you give Hunter maybe a year or two, he could easily become a 20 point per game scorer. It's just the consistency for me just isn't there yet. And when you're making that type of money, I expect you to be consistent night in and night out. I mean, you can look at some of his splits, whether you guys are going to, use ESPN or Basketball Reference, whatever. He's just one of those players where you look at it, you're like, okay, he had 30 points tonight. Next day, it's like 8 points. Like you can't have that if you're going to trade for a player like that.
Well, I'm looking at the catch and shoot numbers too, and 36% catch and shoot. All right, 51% pull up, and then he's around 53% from less than 10 feet. And I don't know if I'm looking at just like the Google page. When I clicked on NBA.com, it did not have any of the data available. So I don't know if that's with a defender less than 10 feet in front of him. I mean, 53% is pretty good. So meaning he's pretty good when he's wide open. I got to look at, I don't know, man. Like, I guess the reason I don't know so much about him is because when I have watched Atlanta Hawks games, he doesn't really pop off the screen for me. Like when you're watching him, it's just, he seems like a high IQ player, hard worker, but I don't know. I just don't love his game, man. I really don't. I'm looking at the numbers and I'm like, he's kind of like a less version of Bojan. I'd rather give the minutes just to Bojan and let him do his thing. Yeah, I see that he's Sadiq with better defense. I've heard that before too. But is his defense really that good where you'd be willing to invest and take on that contract and, let him be the guy in Detroit? Is he a 4 in Detroit or is he a 3?
He's a 3. I don't really think you're trading for him to be a number 1 option. I think you're trading for him to be maybe a number 2 or a number 3 option. You're not looking for him to get you 30 a night. He's more of a complementary piece. He's what we thought Sadiq Bey could possibly be, like a 3-and-D wing that can get you, maybe 13 to 17 points a night, play some good defense, hit some, clutch 3-pointers down the stretch. But like I said, you look at the contract, and it's funny that Game Not said that because DeAndre Hunter and Sadiq Bey are teammates, and Sadiq Bey didn't get extended this summer. Like Sadiq Bey is probably going to get traded again, personally, because they already have DeAndre Hunter. I think if you're the Pistons, it's probably a no. The Pacers wouldn't be surprised. I feel like the Pacers are just going all in, and they're really trying to push for the playoffs, just given their offseason and given, their draft, trading for Obi Toppin. You got Tyrese Halliburton. I think Hunter makes a lot of sense for them. Maybe they trade Buddy Hield and, they swap for DeAndre Hunter. Like I said, maybe they do that. I don't know.
Yeah, but see, even when you say Buddy Hield, I'm like, I'd rather have Buddy Hield than DeAndre Hunter. And just because Buddy Hield's been one of the better shooters in the NBA pretty much since he came into the NBA, like he's an incredible shooter. And I know that's not like the only skill set you need in basketball, but I just don't think DeAndre Hunter is – I think he's just an average player. I think 90 million, good number, great for him. I think it's a lot for a guy that his high games in one season was 67, and that was this past year. Like he's played 53 the year before, 23 the year before, 63 his rookie season. He's not a healthy player. So even if he is like your prototypical 3-and-D guy, can catch and shoot, can lock a guy up, I don't know how many games he's going to play. I don't know how healthy he's going to be for you. And that's a lot of money committed to a 3-and-D guy when the league is full of 3-and-D guys that aren't getting paid nowhere near as much as DeAndre Hunter. There's the names that you have mentioned so far during the segment. I love those guys more than I love DeAndre Hunter. It'd be a no for me.
Yeah, it's just I think what he's getting paid now is kind of like average for the lands, because I know Trutel asked the question, like he's like, his contract that bad? It's not that bad if you look at the CBA and where it's going. We saw players like Kyle Kuzma and Cam Johnson get the bag this summer. They got over $30 million. But to your point, he's not really available 100% of the time. And I had mentioned he's not really a consistent player. Like 1 minute he's scoring 25, the next it's like 10. It's just like, okay. It just he hasn't put it all together yet. But I think for the Pistons standpoint, I think it was smart of them to say thanks, but no thanks. We're going to draft Ausar. But that's just my 2 cents on this topic. I did want to revisit it because I do remember us talking about this maybe 3 or 4 days after the draft live stream that we had, because the trades did come out. I think it was this and the Utah trade were the 2 trades that the Pistons did receive during the draft, but it kind of is alarming that they're still interested in him, for me personally as a fan.
I mean, I'll say this. Like, if he becomes a Piston, I'll root for him. Again, the contract isn't terrible. It's just when you look at it in the percentage of the salary cap it takes up until the 26-27 season, it's taking almost 15% of your salary cap, which is that really how much? And we're just looking at it percentage-wise. Like, that just seems like a lot, especially when you have to pay some of these other players on the Pistons in the next couple of seasons. Like 15% of your salary cap committed to a guy that averages 15 and 4 and shoots 35% from 3. I don't know. I just feel like you can find a guy cheaper on the market that does what DeAndre Hunter does. Maybe not to the same level, but again, I don't even know what that is with DeAndre Hunter because, you know, again, he's just like an average role player. He just doesn't really excite me as much right now.
Kind of just reminds me when Tobias got paid by Philly, and then Philly's been trying to get off his contract ever since they gave it out. I kind of feel like that's like we were making jokes like all last year about John Collins always being in trade rumors and never getting traded. I feel like DeAndre Hunter's the new John Collins for Atlanta. They're just looking to get off of that deal because they're like, oh shit, like why did we give him all this money?
I will say though, from like a scoring perspective, like when he stays in the teens, he has some games where it's just like 14, 17, 17, 14, 15, 18, 16, all in a row. Like he's not bad as like it's just the field goal percentage. That's the thing that fluctuates up and down. Like the consistency and giving you points per game is there. It's the efficiency. That's where it's inconsistent. Because like one day he's shooting 25% from 3, the next day he's shooting 50%. Then he's shooting 20%, and then he's shooting 35%. He's just not overall. Yeah, he's very streaky when it comes to shooting. And I just don't think that's something you want if you're the Pistons. You need someone that's a little bit more of a rock at that position, like someone you can just count on game in and game out. And I don't think that's DeAndre Hunter.
Yeah. But look, so we can get on to our next topic. Do you want to give a couple birthday shout outs before we do? Rasheed Wallace.
Well, yeah.
Ball Don't Lie and Greg Kelser. So shout out to those 2. Happy birthday.
Oh, I did not know that. One more piece of news real quick before we move on. Richard Rip Hamilton inducted into the Michigan Sports Hall of Fame, which is pretty cool. Do you have a favorite moment or a favorite memory from Rip's time in Detroit?
I would probably say the 2004 playoffs. I think the New Jersey series to me was like really crucial. And the Pacers series. I feel like if Rip doesn't go off in either of those series, I don't think the Pistons make the finals personally. I think they really leaned on him in those Pacers series heavily.
Man, do you remember that 51-point game he had against New York?
Oh, yeah. That was special.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Like, it's so crazy. I was just watching the highlights of it today, and I don't know. We'll never see another player like Richard Rip Hamilton, man. The masked one, dude. He was special, man.
You know what's funny, though? A friend of the podcast, Corey Woods, he was there for the Michigan Sports Hall of Fame, and he kind of asked Rip, like, given the Pistons' history, because of the great backcourts, right? Like, you had Isaiah and Joe Dumars, like, it was him and Chauncey. Corey asked him, like, do you think that Cade and Ivy could carry that tradition? And he basically said, like, yeah, he's like, I think they can. Like, they're special enough to where they could be the next great Detroit Pistons backcourt. And I thought, like, coming from a player like that, it just made me happy because, like, we see so many people, like, kind of dog on them, saying, like, oh, they're not that guy. We'll probably trade them. They're not that good. It kind of made me feel good, like, from, like, a Pistons legend saying like, yeah, I think Cade and Ivy and Cade Cunningham have the potential to be a next great Detroit Pistons backcourt. And if you kind of look at all our championship teams, like over history, we've always had a great backcourt.
We always had a solid guard coming off the bench, Lindsey Hunter, Vinny Johnson. I don't know if you remember this play by Richard Hamilton. And every time I say Richard and I'm going to say Hamilton, I always got to say Rip. I just stopped myself right there because I don't know if it sounds stupid or not, but that's who he is, Richard Rip Hamilton. But it was a preseason game, and I have tried finding this highlight, and I forget who's at the free throw line. It might have been Lindsey Hunter. It might have been like Carlos Delfino or something. But they shoot it. He misses it. And then Rip Hamilton comes from the baseline and actually dunks it off the rebound. And I want to say it was against like the Chicago Bulls or maybe even the Milwaukee Bucks or something. But I remember just thinking at the time, because I was younger when this happened, like, man, I love Rip Hamilton, but I'm kind of bored. I'm kind of bored with watching him. I wish I could watch like Tracy. It was against Orlando. That's why I was thinking it. So I remember thinking like, man, I wish I could watch Tracy McGrady in Detroit or like Vince Carter or Kobe, the more exciting, flashy two guards. And then Rip Hamilton just shoved me up with the baseline dunk off a tip. And I don't know. That's another memory I have of Richard Rip Hamilton. I just think it was just so unexpected from him. I didn't even think he had that type of athleticism because I don't know. I don't remember him dunking a whole lot when he was in Detroit, but then when I went back and watched some of his career highlights, he has a lot of dunks in his time in Detroit. It seemed like he was kind of an underrated part of his game, man.
I always remember this quote from Shaquille O'Neal, and he said, 99% of basketball players show you 5% of what they can actually do. It always lives rent-free in my head because Ben Wallace said, I was a good three-point shooter. Larry Brown just wouldn't let me shoot him. In my mind, I think that going to work Pistons, we didn't get to see what they were actually capable of doing because they just played smart, sound basketball. Like, I'm sure Rip could dunk with the best of them out there. I'm sure, he was a good three-point shooter, but we really didn't get to see it until after Larry Brown was gone, right? So it doesn't really surprise me. Like, I know exactly what you're talking about, that highlight. I've seen it where it was a tip-back dunk. If you watch some, Rip's old high school tape, like, he was pretty athletic. So it doesn't really surprise me that, like, you're talking about that highlight because he had some bunnies.
He had a good one against Milwaukee, too, as an offensive rebound by Ben Wallace, who's a very underrated passer. Finds the cutting Rip Hamilton. He just throws it. Gives him the old George Blaha windmill down the middle of the lane. It was pretty cool. But I'm looking at Rip's stats. In the 04-05 season, he averaged 19 a game, 5 assists. Did not know that he averaged 5 assists. And then 4 rebounds with 1 steal. But dude, that's an awesome stat line for Rip Hamilton right there, man. The 19, 5, and 4 that he was given Detroit with 1 steal. I always thought too, like I underrate him so much. And I've said it on this podcast that I still believe he was the weakest of the starting 5 just because we didn't get to see all of him offensively because I felt like Larry Brown shackled him. But when I look back on his numbers, he was so much more of a complete player than I give him credit for.
Yeah, I just don't think I don't think he was a weak link. I mentioned earlier, like, if he doesn't go off in a couple of those series against the New Jersey Nets and the Pacers, Pistons might not be, NBA champions. Like, they really leaned on him to be that bucket getter, that scorer. And I think trading for him as a kid, I was confused by it, but I'm glad they did because he was just such an amazing player. But I know we could reminisce about the glory days because we actually got to witness it as kids. And, we kind of sound like old men yelling at clouds.
That's cool.
But I know you put in the prep sheet, like, highest ceilings.
Yep.
With these draft picks. And I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, this is something I think you might have posted this on Twitter. I just took it from your Twitter account. But Bleacher Report placed Ausar Thompson 3rd on their highest ceiling of the 2023 NBA draft class ahead of Scoot Henderson, which is pretty crazy because last week we talked about Scoot Henderson being on another list of potential top 10 players in the NBA in 5 seasons. Also, that list was created by Bleacher Report. I looked at that list, and I think they had Amen ahead of Ausar, which, I don't know, maybe you can break it down for me. Why would they have Amen over Ausar on that list? Because they have pretty similar games. Like, what's the biggest difference between their games?
Well, before I answer that question, and other people that do listen to the audio side of this podcast, so I'll give the top 5 rankings from Bleacher Report. This is an article from them, their highest ceilings article. So they had Victor Wembanyama. Number 1, I think we can both agree, Victor Wembanyama probably has the highest ceiling out of anyone in this draft class. They had Amen Thompson, number 2. Our guy Ausar at number 3. Scoot Henderson, number 4, which I know you're probably smiling about because you're not high on him. And Brandon Miller, number 5. Now, to get to your question, why would they have Amen Thompson over Ausar Thompson? He said they had similar games. I would say Amen Thompson, to me, has a quicker first step than Ausar Thompson. And I think he's a little bit of a better passer than Ausar Thompson. Now, both of these guys, like, if they develop jump shots, I think they're some of the best players out of this entire draft class. And I think that's the reason why Bleacher Report had Amen above Ausar. But I think it's just like, 1A and 1B. I think you could make a case that Ausar Thompson is a better shooter. And I think that's the one thing in their game where it leaves you wanting more. You wish they were better shooters, but I don't have a problem with this list. I was kind of surprised Brandon Miller was 5, though.
Yeah, and real quick, I think Scoot Henderson wins Rookie of the Year this upcoming season. I'm just always slower on short athletic guards over time. But for like those first 30 years, they're the most exciting guys in the NBA. I think, though, man, I'm looking at him, man, and I know he's the more natural playmaker, and he's considered like the point guard of the two. But, man, it seems like they're really gambling on him just being a fantastic playmaker instead of just an overall offensive player. I think I might give the nod to Ausar just because he brings it more defensively than Amen, according to what they were writing. But, yeah, I am a little surprised they had Brandon Miller at number 5. That just feels like they really honestly wanted to leave him out of the list. But you couldn't do it because he was the number 2 overall pick.
Yeah. I don't really have a problem with this like highest ceilings list because I think all these guys are going to be multiple time All-Stars throughout their career. I really do. I think the one thing with Brandon Miller where kind of leaves me wanting more also is like his separation. Because there's a lot of times where like he can't get separation from his defender and his shot is you can block it very easily. I think that's one thing that he needs to work on, and I think he will because he's how high I was on Brandon Miller all last winter, this summer. Like I really wanted Brandon Miller. I thought he would fit like a glove next to Cade, but I'm still very high on the Brandon Miller hype train. I think he's going to be a really good player, and I think going to a place like Charlotte where you get to play with players like LaMelo Ball and Miles Bridges, I think you're going to see games where, he might explode for 25 to 30 points because he gets to play with players like that.
Yeah. Man, yeah, it is really hard to argue with this list, but I just think it also is kind of funny that why put Scoot on a list where I think they put him 6th to be one of the 10 best players in the NBA in 5 years, but then they move him down behind both the Thompson twins on this list where, I mean, I'm glad that they agree with me because, there's a higher ceiling for 6'7" playmakers than there is for 6'2" playmakers. I just don't know why Amen gets the slight edge because Ausar had better assist numbers. He had better shooting numbers, and both their handles seem pretty tight. And really, from like what we've seen from Ausar, and I have not watched Amen because, I mean, I'm a Pistons fan. he seems like such a fantastic playmaker that I think even if you were to put Ausar and had him play point guard, he'd probably still do pretty well. But I think the biggest difference is he really seems like someone that could be an all NBA defensive player multiple times throughout his career. And I just don't know if you're getting the same thing from his brother. I really do think you have to give the slight edge to Ausar, just by a little bit, because even the stats suggest he's a better player right now than Amen. And I think he has more building blocks to build off of than Amen does. Like with Amen, it just seems like there's a little bit more mystery to his game. Like if he's not a natural playmaker or if he's not a point guard, where does he play on the floor? Which, I mean, he's 6'7", he can probably play anywhere. But with Ausar, there just seems to be more versatility to his game, where if you can't put him here, there's still multiple other places you could put him and he'll be fine.
Yeah, I think that with some men, I understand it. And I think what maybe a lot of, because you only got to see one summer league game, but if you did watch a lot of OTE games, overtime elite games, Amen Thompson was more of the facilitator, and just his first step is so quick to where he can get to the basket at will. And I think that, to me, that's what separates him versus Ausar. But I think Ausar, to me, is going to be a better shooter long-term in the NBA, because I think he's worked on it more. I think that's something where when you look at the two, you're like, okay, Ausar, to me, probably going to be the better shooter, but Men's going to be that kind of point forward that just can get to the basket whenever he wants. It's because he's got such a quick first step.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know, I'd have to see like some 40 times or something, or how they all do in like the 10-yard sprint to really see that explosiveness. Because I don't know, Ausar has a pretty quick first step. He's going to beat a lot of guys off the dribble, especially if that 3-point shot develops and they're trying to run him off the 3-point line. I don't feel like anybody's going to be able to stay in front of him. And I don't know how much quicker Amen is than him, but it just seems like the smallest of things that, they're giving him the edge in over Ausar. I don't know. But we can talk about some of these trades, because I don't want to keep circling around and around trying to protect myself here.
Yeah, I think this trade topic is probably going to be one of our longer topics, but why don't I kind of give a breakdown of this before people get confused?
Yeah.
This is a Bleacher Report article, you guys, so relax. They had a trade for every NBA team that they want to see happen, basically. So Lance and I are going to go over all the trades that involve Detroit Pistons players, and I'll let you take it over with the Denver Nuggets trade. And I know this is a guy that you're very high on.
Yeah, it's my favorite. Well, crap. That was one of the questions. But this is one of my favorite trades that they mentioned. This is one of the 4 that we have. It's with the Denver Nuggets. The trade is Michael Porter Jr. to the Detroit Pistons for Bojan, Alec Burks, and a 2026 first-round pick, lottery protected. We can't even trade, though, the 2026 first-round pick, right?
I want to say if the pick doesn't get converted, meaning like if the Pistons, their draft pick right now is with the Knicks and it's top 18 protected.
Yeah.
Like if that pick doesn't get converted, I think by 2026 or 2027, it turns into a second round pick. So you're able to trade that first round pick, if that makes sense.
Should we list off all of the trades, or?
Well, I can read it for you. I have everything pulled up here on my phone, but do you want to just go over each trade and whether
then we'll
okay.
Yeah, so you want me to do the second one real quick, because I have it pulled up right here. This is the trade I hate the most, though, and it goes with it's with the Cavaliers. It's Alec Burks of the Cleveland Cavaliers for Isaac Okoro, a 2025 second-round pick coming from Milwaukee, a 2020 second-round pick, and a 2027 second-round pick coming from Denver. So a lot of second-round picks, but I'm not super high on Isaac. I don't want to say Isaiah. It's Isaac Okoro, and I would rather keep Alec Burks. I'm not a big fan of this trade. And then the third trade we have is with the Memphis Grizzlies. We've actually talked about this trade, and Bleacher Report has put it in before. but it's Brandon Clark and Zaire Williams, the Detroit Pistons, for Alec Burks. The last trade they did, though, was for Bojan. And then the final trade we have is with the New York Knicks. I don't hate this one, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But Evan Fournier in the 2020 first-round pick, top 18 protected, coming from Detroit to the Detroit Pistons for Bojan. Like, I don't hate that trade. But now that we've gone through all four of them, what is your favorite of these four trades?
So before I do that, I kind of want to break down each trade because I have notes on each of the trades. So I'll start with the Denver one first, and then I'll tell you my favorite. So when I look at this trade that, you know, Denver would get Bojan, Alec Burks, and a 2026 first round pick, lottery protected, for Michael Porter Jr. When I look at $148 million owed to Michael Porter Jr. for a guy that averages 17 points, 5 rebounds, and 1 assist a game, no, absolutely not. No.
Okay.
That's just too much money for a guy that just scores the basketball and doesn't facilitate. If Michael Porter Jr. came to Detroit, he would probably become a second option next to Cade Cunningham. And I just don't know if I'm willing to invest $148 million over the next couple of years for a guy that has one elite skill, and that's scoring the basketball. I think for $148 million, for me, I would be out. And the injury history for me, I'm kind of like, I know he's been healthy over the past couple of seasons, but that back does scare me, and I don't know how much longer it will hold up, because there was some, you know, real talks about him not being able to play basketball again because his back was that bad.
Real quick, though, do you think, though, there could be more to his game, but we're not seeing all of it because of the team he currently plays for?
Yeah. I think there's more there, but it's just with the contract, I'm not willing to invest $148 million over the next couple of seasons when I know I'm going to have to extend my franchise player in Cade Cunningham and possibly Cade and Ivy and Jalen Duren. You might not have enough money to extend all three of those guys. And I've told you before, I think those are the three foundation pieces that you need to build around.
Yeah.
So with the Cavs trade, I absolutely hate it. I think it makes no sense. You just drafted Ausar Thompson. The second round picks, they're okay. I'm not really too high on Isaac Okoro. I think if the Pistons wanted to trade Alec Burks, I think they can get more value for it, in my opinion anyways. He's one of the best bench scorers in the NBA. So for the Cavs trade, I was kind of out. The Grizzlies trade, again, I think Brandon Clark, great. Zaire Williams, kind of like a mystery. You don't really know it's there, but like Brandon Clark is still injured. Like if you
I forgot about that.
If you trade for him, he's not going to be available. And if you look at Zaire Williams, he's just not consistent enough for me to trade for.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at his numbers since he's entered the league. It's just like, if I give you more minutes, will you produce? And you just don't know. And I think if you're going to trade, again, one of the best bench scorers in the NBA and Alec Burks, to me, I think I would be out. Like, I think I can get more value for Alec Burks. I'd rather keep him if that's the best that, you know, Memphis could offer. And the Knicks trade, I think, to me, you asked me which one was my favorite. This was my favorite. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
When you look at this trade on the surface, the Knicks are getting Bojan, right? Pistons are getting Evan Fournier and their draft pick back, meaning those protections, they're coming back to Detroit. The Pistons could trade that 2024 pick if they wanted to go trade for a star right now. The reason why I like this trade so much, and I wrote this down. So Evan Fournier's contract, if you look at it, he's owed $18 million this season. He's got a club option going into next season, meaning the Pistons don't want to have Evan Fournier in their roster. They can just create $19 million in cap space, and you get your draft pick back. To me, that is so damn tempting, Lance. That is so tempting. Like, you get your draft pick back from the Christian Wood, Isaiah Stewart trade. If Fournier kind of has like a resurgence, you got another guy that can knock down 3-point shots, along with all the veterans that you already have on the court. Like, I remember Evan Fournier in his Magic days. He was carrying that team, you know, averaging like 18, 19 points a game as a starting two guard. But hey, if he just kind of lays an egg and a stinker, he's got a club option. You can kind of just wave it and say, you know, like, I don't give a shit. Like, bye. Like, and you have $19 million of cap space you could spend. on free agents. So for me, I love the New York Knicks trade. All the other trades are kind of like meh. Like I'm not really like in love with them. I don't really think the Pistons get better. When you look at a talent acquisition standpoint, I really don't think, investing close to $150 million in a Michael Porter Jr. would be worth it if you're looking at the long-term future of this basketball team. But for me, I love the New York Knicks trade. But what about you? Out of all of these four?
Okay, so my favorite, I'll start with that one. My favorite trade is the Memphis Grizzlies one. The Evan Fournier one, I do like that trade a lot because I actually am a fan of Evan Fournier. I still think there's a solid scorer in there. I just think he was better than New York's bench because of Thibodeau. But anyways, let me talk about this Michael Porter Jr. one, though. I do hate the contract. I love the player, though. And the reason I hate the contract, I don't mind him getting $30 million because I think this is a guy that could easily get you 25 a night. He could probably easily be one of the best scorers in the NBA. It's just not something he has to do with so much star power on Denver. But his contract, it's a quarter. It's a quarter, 25% of the salary cap for the Denver Nuggets. But I think as a catch and shoot player and a guy that can move without the ball and the guy that can shoot it as well as him, he would be a phenomenal piece to play alongside Cade and Ivy, Cade Cunningham, and Ausar Thompson as they drive and kick and they look for someone to make a shot. He would be your guy. He would eat it up in Detroit with those three guys running the floor with him. He can run in transition. He's a good trailer. He's more of a downhill dribbler, like gets it. They try to run him off. Like he's not much of a one-on-one isolation player, but he can get to the hole and he can finish around the rim. I think there's more of a playmaker because I went back and watched some of his highlights from this past season. He's just not asked to be a playmaker, but he definitely has some good on-court awareness. Leaves a little bit desired on the defensive side, but he knows how to play passing lanes. He'll get his hands there. I really love Michael Porter Jr., and I think he would be an absolute monster in Detroit with those guys, and he would definitely play that 4 spot. But you're right, that contract is way too much for a guy that, yeah, he played 62 games, but he only played 9 games last year, 19 if you include the 10 playoff games. Then he played 61 the year before, then 55, missed his entire rookie season back in 2018 and 2019 with a back injury. Who knows if that's actually behind him? And yes, that is a little bit of a joke because it's a back injury and behind. But it's not my favorite. I know I just went and talked about it a ton. My favorite trade is the Memphis Grizzlies one because, again, the theme of this podcast for me has just been talking about how bad the front court depth is for the Detroit Pistons. But you get someone like Brandon Clark, a high IQ player that can play the 4 to the 5. He's a good passer out of that 5 spot. He's one of the best athletes in the NBA, especially at that 5 spot. He can finish. I think I could be getting the numbers wrong. I don't have them in front of me, but I think if he had qualified, he would have been one of the top 4, would have been one of the leaders in field goal percentage. I think he shot like 64% or something like that this past season. I actually want to look that up myself because I don't want to sound like an idiot. But yeah, I love that trade just for Brandon Clark and what he could bring to this Detroit Pistons team. Okay, shot 66% from the field, so I was technically wrong at 64. But he's a good rebounder, knows when to make cuts, can find those little holes in the defense, has a great little floater in the mid-range. It's just he's a solid player. He's just a little undersized at 6'8", but he makes up for it in his athleticism. I already told you I dislike the Cavaliers trade. But what is so would the Cavaliers be your least favorite then?
Yeah, to me, it makes no sense. Like, you just drafted Ausar. Why would you want someone that's kind of like a carbon copy, but like a lesser player?
Yeah. What trade is the most realistic to you?
I think the most realistic would probably be the Knicks one.
Ooh, okay.
I really do. Because you kind of look at Evan Fournier, because I was just like, man, Tibbs doesn't play him at all. Like, he played a couple games throughout the season, but like he just did not play him at all. And I don't know if there's something there. I don't know if maybe he's just maybe in the doghouse with Tom Thibodeau. But like I just remember, 'cause I used to watch a lot of Magic games. I was just like, dude, he used to be like a 18-point per game scorer for the Magic, and like he just doesn't play with tips. Maybe he doesn't, show up to practice. I just saw an interview with Joakim Noah saying how Kyle Korver would show up to practice and he'd just be sitting in his car because Tom Thibodeau's practices were just ridiculous. But hey, maybe he does that. I don't know. But I think getting that draft pick. What's that?
Oh, I was just going to say his last 26 games with Orlando, he averaged 20 a game with 4 assists and 3 rebounds. That's Evan Fournier. But yeah, with that draft pick, that makes it the most realistic.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at a realistic trade, I think that makes the most sense. I think a lot of Pistons fans would probably want the draft pick back because we always talk about it. We're like, yeah, it's top 18 protected this year. Like if the Pistons come out and they win like let's say 50 games this year, that draft pick goes to the New York Knicks.
So, which of these 4 trades benefits the Pistons the most, in your opinion?
Like from a beneficial standpoint, I still think it's the Knicks trade. I think the Knicks trade to me makes the most sense. But the 2 Alec Burks trades, I don't really get. You got Brandon Clark, who's coming off an Achilles injury. You have Zaire Williams, who hasn't really proven anything in the NBA. And I think the Okoro trade, another Burks trade again, I would rather keep him. I think Burks is more valuable than Isaac Okoro in a couple seconds from a couple of years down the road. Like, I think if you do trade Alec Burks, you got to get something in equal return. Like a lot, those trades to me just kind of seem one-sided.
Yeah, he's in 3 of the 4. He's also in the Michael Porter Jr. trade with the Denver Nuggets. But I think the one that would benefit the most, even though he is still hurt and he's coming off that Achilles injury, I think Brandon Clark would add the most. Like he would help out the Pistons tremendously. I mean, I do think Michael Porter Jr. would, but that just doesn't seem realistic at all for me just because of how big his contract is. But, man, Brandon Clark, when healthy, I think he'd be a tremendous piece with the Detroit Pistons. And I would love for that trade to happen. But, I mean, you're right. Zaire Williams, I don't know what else is there, but I just feel like well, I have the hiccups. He's kind of more of like a filler piece to make the contracts work. But Brandon Clark, man, bring him to Detroit, man.
I probably would stay away just because of the Achilles.
Yeah. But when he's healthy, though, you think he can still?
I don't know if he can bounce back, though, from that Achilles injury because that was like a really nasty injury. But yeah. I mean, he could. Like, to me, I think the Knicks makes the most sense, but I don't know if they would make it because they probably want to hold on to that pick. But I think all 4 of these trades were just kind of like, if I had to rate them on a scale 1 to 10, they're like all 5 out of 10s. Like, I don't hate them, but I don't love them.
Do you even think Bojan would play for the Knicks, though? Like, I know he's a better team defender. Like, he doesn't get exposed as much when the overall team defense is better because he's not a terrible defender. I mean, he's not a traffic cone out there. You know what I'm saying? Like, he can get a hand up. He knows how to stay in front of guys. It's just he's going to be 34 years old this season. I don't even know if he would play for the New York Knicks. He'd probably hate that place, man.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like Europeans, if they're getting paid, they really don't give a shit where they go.
Yeah, but
as long as they're getting that money, like if I'm getting $20 million, I don't care if I got to play in New York.
Well, I don't think I wouldn't mind playing in New York. I'm just saying for the coach, and I feel like Bojan is one of those guys that would rather be playing than just sitting on the bench not playing. I would hate to see that for him. I'd rather. Yeah, even though you're getting that pick back for New York, I want to see Bojan go to a place that he can thrive. He deserves it after 59 games in Detroit. So before we get to the Q&A, we can do another stats predictions. We did Joe Harris and Killian Hayes last week. So far, we've done Monte Morris, Ausar Thompson, Cade and Ivy, Isaiah Stewart, Bojan, Alec Burks, Joe Harris, Killian Hayes, Duran, and Livers. We just really got to talk about Marcus Sasser and Cade Cunningham, really. Unless I'm blanking on someone. I thought we did
Cade already, though.
Well, we've talked about Cade every podcast, so we really don't have to talk about the stats prediction because, me, it's 24-7-7. That's what I think is going to happen. But we've talked so much about Cade, and his stats upcoming. Let's just do Marcus Sasser then. What do you think his stats will be his rookie year?
I do want to say I think he will get some playing time.
Yeah.
And I think the playing time he's probably going to get, assuming Killian is still on the team opening night, I think those two are going to be battling for minutes. But I am going to be fair, and I'm going to give Marcus Sasser around 6.5 points a game, 3 rebounds, maybe 2 assists, and I think he's going to shoot around 37% from 3.
37%?
Yeah.
Man, you took my points, man. I thought he would average around, because I'm with you. I do think he will get in some run this year. I don't think he'll get run early in his NBA career just because there's so many guards on this team. But I do think we will see Marcus Sasser, especially after the All-Star break, unless the Pistons are really in like the thick of the playoff run and they don't want to mess up the rotation too much. But when he is on the floor and when he's getting minutes, I'm with you. I think he averages around, I would say 5 to 6 points per game, but I'm going to go 6 just because I want to end on a positive note. I want to say 2 rebounds. I want to say 1 assist. And I'm going to say he shoots 34% from 3 and around 42% from the field. That's what I'll say for Marcus Sasser, though. But I do think what we're going to see a lot from him is just that energy defensively. We're going to see him kind of get after some point guards in the NBA, and I think that's the thing we're going to take away the most from his rookie season. That's what I think for Marcus Sasser.
Yeah, I think he's such a unique player that you can play him at point guard or shooting guard.
Yeah,
because I think he can play both. And I was listening to the Pistons Pulse podcast because they had an interview with him, and he says, I could play both. I don't really view myself as a point guard or a shooting guard. Like, I think that I honestly could play both positions. But I think his ability to just impact the game from a scoring standpoint, I think will be very intriguing to Monty. To maybe you give him some garbage time to start the season and kind of like see where he's at in his stage of development, and maybe he just shows out and takes advantage of those minutes, and maybe you find maybe a solid 7 to 10 minutes a night for this kid, because I think I've told you last week, he reminds me so much of Terry Rozier. He's just got that game to him where like he's doing the step back threes, he's just scoring at will. Like we talked about the Rico Hines runs, like he was getting by Cade and Ivy a couple of times, and I was like, oh, that's something to keep an eye on. So I'm really happy with the draft pick too.
I actually have Terry Rozier's stats pulled up right now because I wanted to see what he did his rookie year. How many minutes per game do you think Terry Rozier got his rookie year?
Probably like 14.
Ooh, let me give you over under 10. You think you got more or less than 10 per game?
8.
Yep, you got 8 minutes. Are you looking it up right now?
No, I don't.
Okay, yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. I thought because right when you said 8, yeah, it's exactly 8 minutes per game. Man, he made a jump though to 17. Yeah, I was looking. I thought there would be. Yeah, he averaged 2 points per game his rookie year, 2 rebounds and 1 assist. That's what he did his rookie year and shot terrible percentages. But he only played 39 games.
Yeah.
Man. I would love to watch his rookie highlights to see if there was anything there where you're like, he's eventually going to be a 20-point scorer in the NBA. Because the only reason I say that, because if Marcus Sasser has a similar rookie season, I don't want fans to turn on him, Like if he's only playing 8 minutes per game and they're like, well, his stats kind of suck. He's not much of a scorer. That's what we thought. I just want to know what Terry Rozier was doing that first year in Boston where it made them fall in love with him, where they were like, yeah, we believed what this kid can do.
Yeah, I mean, I think Monty will use him in situations where they need more of a scoring punch. Maybe it's a night where Alec Burks needs some rest and you can play a Marcus Sasser. And as soon as I said that, it made me think of the new NBA rules. I don't know if you saw it, but like if you sit out 2-star players, you get like this huge fine. And the Pistons don't have anyone listed from ESPN's list, so they could just straight up just rest like half the roster and they wouldn't get in trouble.
Yeah, because a star is considered someone that's made an all-star game or an all-NBA, right, in like the last 3 years of their career or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's going to be an interesting rule.
I feel like that rule is just for Paul George and Kawhi Leonard.
Oh yeah, the Clippers. Yeah, they're the odds favorites to break that rule, dude. 100%. One more interesting thing about Terry Rozier, as I'm looking at his game logs, you will. I don't know if you would believe this or not. He did not have one game his rookie year until the playoffs that he scored over double figures. His season high, his rookie year was, I think, 7 points. His rookie year, then he had 10 points in a playoff game. Would you believe that, knowing how his career has turned out, that he didn't even go over 10 points per game his rookie season in one game until the playoffs?
Well, Michael Powell had a really good point. He said, well, that's because they had Kyrie Irving in Boston that year.
Yeah, but so
that makes a lot of sense, though, because, like, if you have Kyrie, like, you're probably not going to lean on a rookie like that.
Oh, yeah, no, I get it. But, I mean, you would think at least some point, because he got 20 minutes a couple times during his rookie stint. I just figured you would at least see, like, at least 10 points one time during his rookie year. I was just surprised with that because Terry Rozier has really turned into a solid player.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it has more to do with Boston's playoff aspirations, and they were looking to win. Where I think with Sasser, because I know we're talking about the two, I think he'll get an opportunity to play more because I know Pistons fans want to win, but I think Sasser will get opportunities to where he'll be able to show Monty what he's capable of, and maybe you give him some playing time while still trying to develop, which you're not going to put him out there when it's a, like 95 game, right? But maybe they're down like 12 points and they need a spark off the bench. Like maybe Burks just isn't having it tonight. Maybe you throw Sasser out there just to try something.
Yeah, I think that, like I've already said before, I think the beginning of the season, you're not going to see him a whole lot on the floor, maybe garbage time minutes. But I do think he will show enough where you're going to seriously consider giving him some bigger minutes after the All-Star break, unless the Pistons are in playoff contention. You don't want to mess up the rotation. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting year for Marcus Sasser. I think he's still going to be a huge part of this team going forward. Do we have any Q&A questions?
Q&A questions. Do we have any? Let me look. Probably. Hold on. This actually comes from Red Baron, and when we were talking about like Richard Hamilton earlier, about him being inducted in the Michigan Sports Hall of Fame, I think this is a really good question. He asked, Rip was such, I can't read today, basically saying, was he the last elite mid-range scorer who only focused on the mid-range?
You might have to give that to DeMar DeRozan, because I don't think he shoots anything other than mid-range jumpers or at the rim. But I think he's one of the last few elite players to know how to come off of a screen and take one dribble and pull up. Like, you don't really see that a lot from other guys. Like, I feel like in today's NBA, you see a lot of movement along the perimeter, but it's not quite like what Rip Hamilton was doing. I guess you could actually throw Klay Thompson in there as well as a guy that can move without the ball, but he's not much. He doesn't shoot the mid-range quite like as much as Rip Hamilton did. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you would say that Rip Hamilton is one of the last elite mid-range scorers, but he was always coming off screens and moving without the ball. We didn't really see a whole lot of Rip get the ball, clear everything out, and him go one-on-one too much. We saw it a few times, and I think that was an underrated part of his game as well, as how he could beat people one-on-one. But yeah, as a mid-range scorer, yeah, he did have a lot in the bag too when he was in the mid-range. Like, he could actually post people up. He had a nice little floater. He knew how to use his body as like a shield to get his shot up against much larger guys. And he had, like, when I was watching the highlights, when he was scoring in the mid-range, it just wasn't always jump shots, man. He would, like, put his body into people and have kind of these unorthodox ways of scoring. Like, yeah, I would agree with Red Baron right there that he is one of the last elite guys from the mid-range.
Yeah, I'm not really like when I look at the NBA, all these players are just so hyper focused on the 3-point shot. I feel like if you were looking at like mid-range scores, I feel like DeMar DeRozan's up there, and I feel like Cade Cunningham has the potential to be one of those mid-range scorers too, but not to the effect of Richard Hamilton, because a lot of these guys really aren't like coming off screens like that. Like you don't really see players that play the shooting guard position come off screens like that, like outside of Klay Thompson. Like that's the first player I think of, but Klay Thompson's more known for his 3-point shooting ability.
Yeah.
I think Rip is just. It's funny we talk about it now. He's like a classic. Like he's just a throwback player. Like you don't really see too many players in the NBA right now that really focus on that mid-range jump shot.
Other guys, I want to give some credit to the guys in the mid-range, though. CJ McCollum, he's fantastic from the mid-range. Cade Cunningham, DeMar DeRozan. Klay Thompson is good from the mid-range, especially when they run him off the three-point line. He takes like 2 or 3 dribbles, gets there around the free throw line, and then just lets it go. He's solid. He's great at that. Dude, I mean, man, I don't know. Those are some of my favorites from the mid-range right there, just those 3. And I remember that maybe people think I'm crazy, but Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, I think that was the closest we've had to a Chauncey Billups and Rip Hamilton backcourt in the modern NBA than pretty much anybody else. I think Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum were the closest to Chauncey Billups and Rip Hamilton in the modern NBA. They were just awesome to watch.
Yeah. Did you see Chauncey? Did you stay up to watch that Colorado game last night or no?
I saw a little bit of it. I didn't watch. I ended up falling asleep, but yeah, I watched a little bit of it. I did see the photo, or I saw the photo today of Chauncey Billups and Kyle Lowry talking, which is pretty interesting.
It's kind of funny that like Kyle Lowry plays for the Heat and Chauncey's the head coach of the Blazers, and people are just like, oh, they're friends. Like, you guys are just reading into it too much. I was just like, man, like,
yeah, crazy that they're both friends, and one of them is, a coach of an NBA team, and the other one happens to be a player who the coach's star player wants to go and play for that franchise. Yeah, it's really, really interesting how it all works out that way. There's definitely something there to that meeting between those two.
Yeah, for sure. I want to get to another question. This has to do with Monty Williams. And I feel like we've talked about this a couple of times. So Michael asks, do you think Monty will play just as much one big lineups as he did in Phoenix?
You just mean with one big man and then have 4 out? Yeah, I think we'll see that. That's why I think Isaiah Stewart coming off the bench could be another thing as well, because then you can still continue that one big lineup and you lose the athleticism, but you get a better defensive player in Isaiah Stewart, and you still get a strong rebounder, even if Duran's sitting on the bench. But yeah, you can go 1 out with either one of those guys. Yeah, I think we'll see it definitely in Detroit.
Yeah, like I think we've talked about it. Like Troy Weaver might want a 2 big lineup, but Monty Williams might not. Maybe that's not his philosophy.
Yeah.
Maybe he feels like, I just want to have a backup. I just want to have a center. I don't want to have 2 centers on the court that are trying to play power forward. Which makes it interesting because you have 4 big men in Bagley, Wiseman, Duran, and Stewart.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see. I don't really know what Monty's going to do. He might try to do that 2 big lineup to start off the season, but like if it's not working, he might go to more of a traditional approach, like you're asking, Michael, where he just plays the 1 big and you just have floor spacers to surround the center with. But I don't know. We're gonna have to wait and see. Let's see. This is another question. This comes from Trutella. Always good to see his name. He said, question, do you believe that Detroit will have 3 players this year average 18 points a game? I could see Cade and Ivy averaging at least 20 points a game this year, while Bojan averaging 18 on high efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think Cade and Ivy get over 20 points per game. I think, Cade 24, Jaden Ivy 21. And Bojan, I think we'll see a little bit of a dip from him scoring wise, but 18 per game, yeah, that I could definitely see that. So yeah, I agree with Truth Tell. I think we could see 3 players averaging 18 or more points per game this season. I do think we'll see, I want to say, we'll at least see 5, maybe 6 players average 10 or more points per game on this team as well. I think we're going to get a well-rounded scoring team this year. Like Monte Morris, he might be one of those guys. Isaiah Stewart might be one of those guys. Duran is definitely going to be one of those guys. Yeah, and then Cade, Ivy, and Bojan. That'd be 6 players that I think all get over 10 points per game for the Detroit Pistons.
So 3 players to average 18 points a game. I think Cade, right off the bat, will. I think Bojan will. And I've told you, I think Jaden Ivey's going to benefit the most under Monty Williams, because I think he's going to try to use him in a similar fashion as Devin Booker. And what I mean by that is he's going to use him more in the traditional shooting guard sense of having him come off screens, having him cut to the basket. And I think there's going to be a lot of easy scoring opportunities for Jaden Ivey. And I think easily the Pistons could have 3 players average 18 points a game. I just hope that we're not giving up more points. If we, average 115, I don't want to be, giving up 130.
No, I don't think we'll see that.
Yeah.
The Pistons back in the 04, the championship team, they had 7 guys average 10 or more. And I'm rounding up for Okur, Corliss Williamson, and Ben Wallace. They're all at 9.5. But you take those guys plus Tayshaun Prince, Sheed, Billups, and Richard Hamilton. Whew, you had a deep team right there, man. 7 guys, 10 or more points. Pretty cool.
So Chris said, dropping some knowledge on us. He said last 2 players that averaged 20 points a game were Hill and Stackhouse in 1999-2000.
Dude, yeah, we've never really had guys. Jerry Stackhouse, I think, has the highest average in a season for the Pistons, right, at like 29 a game. I want to say he has the highest. I don't know if there's another player. I don't think the Pistons have ever had a 30-point scorer, right?
No, I think they probably have, if I had to look back in history, and I don't, maybe like back in the 50s or 60s, like maybe Bailey Howell or something like that, going like way back, but who knows? This is a good question from Ryan. He said, are you interested in bringing Monte Morris back after this season, or is it too early to tell?
Man, he's one of my favorite players in the NBA today. I was ecstatic when they brought him in. I think it's a little too early to tell, but right now I'm very interested in bringing Monte Morris back after the season because, man, he averaged 5 assists per game last year with only 1 turnover. Like, he's such a careful basketball player, and he's such a high IQ player that, man, even though he doesn't blow you away with the stats, he's just such a valuable piece. Like, they still miss him in Denver. I think Nikola, wow, I cannot talk right now. Jokic, you know who I'm talking about. He still comments on Monte Morris, man. Like, it's always a big embrace when those two. He's such a valuable piece. So I am very interested in bringing him back, even though it still seems like it's too early to tell. Because for all I know, we could be potentially witnessing the worst season that he'll ever play in the NBA, which I hope we don't.
Yeah. I think it's too early to tell, but I think he's going to have a great season. I've told you, I think he's going to have a season where he puts up career highs across the board, because I feel like every time we sign a free agent, they have more opportunities, and I think he's a player that Monty Williams is really going to lean heavily on. Like Monty Williams always talks about when he got the Phoenix, Ricky Rubio was that veteran backup point guard that he really leaned on, right? And I think he's going to kind of lean on Monte Morris in that same way, where he might be out there in crunch time with Cade Cunningham if the game's close. And I think he's a backup point guard that, for me, it makes me happy because he's one of those veterans that makes the right play night in and night out, and he doesn't really make too many mistakes.
No, he's such an efficient point guard. Real quick, Jerry Stackhouse does have the highest single regular season per game average. Second is George Yardley with 27. Jerry Stackhouse, number 1, 29.7. So about 30 points per game if you round up. It's crazy.
Yeah. I'm just really high on Monte Morris. Like you had said, 5-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. Like that's insane. Like that's crazy.
Yeah, his career average is 0.8. Did you watch the Pistons Under the Hood 30-minute video? That was pretty awesome, man. I really like that. And I think I mean, I'm sure most fans know this, but he is from Flint, Michigan. It's really cool to have a hometown talent play for your team. And it means so much to you. You get it from that video that the Pistons posted. It's really cool, and it's truly special to be able to play for your hometown team, and we get to see it with Monte Morris, man. I think he's going to have a big year for the Pistons.
Yeah. This is another question. I've never seen this person on our live stream before, so maybe they're a first-time listener. Shout out to him. Question. If you had to get rid of one player from the young core, Cade, Ivy, Ausar, Duren, who are you getting rid of? This reminds me of the question last week that pissed a lot of people off. I think it was Ben. Ben asked, do you see a Tyrese Halliburton type of trade in the near future? Yeah. And we were talking about Ivy. This is a hypothetical question. I want to get that out there. If I had to get rid of one, oh God, man, that's hard. I love them all. I'm gonna let you do it.
Yeah, this also reminds me of the question we got a couple of episodes ago where they asked us who we would trade for Jaden McDaniels of the Timberwolves. Or is it Jalen McDaniels? Is it Jaden? Whoever plays for the Timberwolves, the McDaniels guy. I don't know if it's Jaden or Jalen. I had said Ivy. But, man, I do really love Ivy's game. And I did talk about last week where I could see him being thrown into a Tyrese Halliburton type trade if he tries to play like hero ball too much, which really is still a concern for me. Man, if I had to get rid of one player, man, I'm definitely not getting rid of Cade, and I'm definitely not getting rid of Ausar, just because I think Ausar is going to be so special in the NBA, man. I think he's going to be phenomenal, man. Like, he can end up being like Scottie Pippen, and there's just so much. There's so much. I love Scottie Pippen's game, man. And it'd be so cool to see Ausar. I love Andre Iguodala's game, and Ausar could play like him too. Like, man. So it really comes down to Jaden Ivey or Duren. Man, I've said Ivy in the past. But, man, I think him and Cade could be so special, especially if he doesn't want to play hero ball. I'm going to say Duren because I feel like you can still – there's so much – like Duren can end up just being kind of like a Tyson Chandler, who was a very solid NBA player. But, like, you know what I mean? Like, where he's just rim rolling and you don't get to see the full offensive package. Like, I don't know how often we're going to see Duren shoot the ball, like, from the mid-range. I feel like most of his points are going to come from post-ups and then rolling to the rim and just getting easy dunks or catching lobs. So I feel like it'd be so easy to see Duren in a pretty limited role offensively where we don't get to see the whole package. So I'll get rid of Duren just because.
Oh, my God, wow.
I'll keep the three-headed monster. Well, okay, look, because I've said that I think Duren could be a baby Dwight Howard, Not saying he can win 4 Defensive Player of the Years because the physicality, the athleticism, and I think once he figures out the whole timing, but defensively, he's really not that good. Like, there's still a steep learning curve from him defensively. So I just think, dude, I'm just saying, like, there's still a steep learning curve for Duren defensively. Like, he's a monster and he's amazing, but you're asking me a question. And
I know. I'm just surprised.
Yeah. Well, because I've always gone with Ivy, but I was thinking about it too, where I'm like, man, if Ivy, Cade, and Ausar, that could be such a lethal combination on the perimeter that you could probably live without Monster Duren, and you could probably just find a replacement that's not as equally as good but can still get the job done more than you could find someone to replace the other three. That's just my take.
Yeah, I think for the purpose of this question, to answer it, it's extremely hard. I'm not getting rid of Cade Cunningham.
It's painful.
I'm just not. No, I'm not getting rid of Cade. I'm not getting rid of Duren. And okay. I know some people say like you can find another Duren type. You can find a guy that can rim roll and players like that. I think you can, but I think the potential there, we haven't seen what's actually there yet. I think there's a lot of layers to his game that haven't been unpacked, so I'm not getting rid of Duren. Ausar is kind of like your prototypical 3-and-D wing. And to me, it would come between Ausar and Ivy, because I think players like Ausar, they're in every draft class, but it seems like less than like 5% of them actually hit. Everyone's trying to find that next Kawhi. So I think I'm going to go Ivy for this, because I think Ausar has all the tools to become. I'm not saying he's going to become Kawhi, but I think he has the tools to become a two-way player. I think with Ivy, I hate my computer sometimes. No, I don't want to freaking upgrade. I think with Ivy, I completely lost my train of thought. I love the player that he is, and I think there's a lot of potential there. But my one thing with him is, like, can he learn to slow down?
Yeah.
Right? Can he let the game slow down for him where he's not a carbon copy of Russell Westbrook, where, Westbrook's been playing, it seems like, for 15 years almost, and he still hasn't learned how to slow down. He just relies on his athleticism so much. I think it's unfair to categorize Ivy and Westbrook in that same kind of light, but that's the one thing where I ask myself, like, can Ivy slow down? And if he can, then, he's going to be an all-time great player. He's going to be one of the best shooting guards in the NBA for years to come. But that's my one thing. It's like, this nitpicking at this point. I think it would be between Ausar and Ivy for me, but I hate questions like this because you have to pick one. And it's a great question. It's an absolutely great question, but made both of us very uncomfortable trying to ask this or answer this.
Yeah, I think if I had to rank them as untouchable, I think Cade, no, not even think. I know Cade and Ausar are my 1s and 2s they're my top 2 in rankings for who's untouchable out of these 4. And then Duren and Ivy would rank out my 3 and 4. But man, there's just, it'd be so hard to get rid of Cade and Ivy, because he's one of those guys where I don't feel like he would haunt you for years and years to come. But the potential and how well his game could potentially fit between Cade and Ausar is like, man, if they all figure it out, you really have something special. But with Duren, it's like, I just don't know if we're going to see everything from him. Like, I think we're going to see more offensively from him in like off-season stuff like Rico Hines footage than we ever will in the NBA. I don't think we're ever going to see him get a rebound and dribble the ball up and have it be like a main part of his game. We might see it every once in a while, but like you're never going to see that from Duren all the time, because the Pistons, you have 3 guys that can bring it up the floor. that are in this question. So you're not going to have Duren do that. So that's why I would say I would get rid of Duren, because even though there is still a lot of potential and he could be one of the 15 best players in the NBA, it's just, I think for him to scratch the surface of his game, it's going to take a lot more growing from him than it is the other three. I think we're going to see the potential almost seeing all three of the other guys, Cade, Ivy, and Ausar, reach their potential. I think there's a better shot at them reaching their potential than there is Duren reaching his potential. And that's also because Duren's potential is just so massive. But his game is also kind of dependent of who feeds him the ball and putting him in the right position. And that's just what happens when you're a center in the NBA.
Yeah, like I actually want to change my answer now that I think about it. I think I would probably go without Ausar.
Okay.
Now that I'm thinking about it, because like Ivy did learn to slow down a little bit, but he didn't do it 100% of the time. Like there were games where like I was the fastest guy in college. I'm going to try to run around these guys, and then like the NBA has some of the best athletes in the world, and there would be instances where he tries to be faster and plays faster than everyone, and it turned into a turnover. I think he did really turn a corner like in March, April, where he tried to play at different speeds, and I was really encouraged by that. But I think I would go with Ausar because like I feel like every draft there's that prototypical 3-and-D wing that people are hoping that turns into like a Paul George or a Kawhi Leonard or something. Like this year was Brandon Miller, right? Yeah, everyone's like, oh, he's going to be the next Paul George. Like there's so many of those guys in the draft, but like just for like the purpose of this question, I think I'm going to switch my answer to Ausar. Like the more I thought about it, like if Ivy becomes a knockdown 3-point shooter, and he learns to change pace, maybe he's like closer to a De'Aaron Fox than a Westbrook.
So you're going with Ausar as the guy that you would get rid of?
Yeah. Like now that I thought about it, I was like, you know what? I think the more I think about it, I think getting rid of Ivy would probably be a mistake.
It's crazy.
Yeah, a great question, by the way. Like, it's an uncomfortable question because we look like jackasses, but this is what Q&A is for.
Yeah, I'm sure some people will take it out of context. Be like, these guys hate Duren. These guys hate Ivy. These guys hate.
No, we don't hate them.
Yeah, it's just for the sake of the podcast.
It's a great question. We'll do one more because it seems like we're doing a 2-hour podcast every week. This comes from Organic Lindo. I think he's a new listener, but he's been on like probably over the last month or so, like consistently. So shout out to him. So do you see Monty Williams benching Wiseman and or Bagley like he did with Smith because he was awful defensively, running more of a small ball as a result?
Yeah, I think we'll see James Wiseman play the 5, but I think it's Marvin Bagley's time in Detroit is pretty much up, and I think we'll really see Joe Harris and Isaiah Livers get some minutes at the 4 spot this upcoming season. Even though Harris really isn't a defender or anything, Livers is, but also Harris can spread the floor as long as he's not shooting like his playoff numbers suggest, where he's shooting like 18% from the 3-point line. But if he gets back to what he was doing during the regular season, you have a 43% shooter from 3, and that is much better to have on the floor than Wiseman or Bagley because of their defense is so atrocious. But I do think James Wiseman does get minutes at the 5. I think there's a reason Troy Weaver brought him in, and it's not just to see what he can do. I just think they really do believe in him. I just don't think you should throw him into the fire quite yet. So I'll say James Wiseman does get minutes, but Bagley's time is done, and you will see more small ball with Joe Harris and Isaiah Livers getting minutes at the 4 spot this season.
So this is a great question. If people don't know what he's talking about with Smith, he's talking about Jalen Smith, who the Suns drafted really high, and they eventually traded him to the Pacers. So to answer your question, Organic Lindo, can I see Monty benching Wiseman and or Bagley? So I think Bagley and Wiseman are going to be interchangeable this season. I think there's going to be games where Wiseman plays a lot of the backup center minutes, and there will be games where Bagley plays a lot of the backup center minutes, because I don't think they're going to use him as a backup power forward. I think when you have an Isaiah Livers on your bench, you have a Joe Harris who you just traded for. I think those guys provide more spacing, and they're more reliable to hit an open 3-point shot. But could I see Monty doing this? Absolutely, I could. I just don't really know who is going to win that battle between a James Wiseman and a Marvin Bagley. Like I've made the joke, they're Spider-Man meme pointing at each other.
Yeah.
They're very similar players. Both high lottery picks, both have a lot of promise, both have tons of potential that just hasn't been, untapped yet. But going with just everything Troy Weaver has said about defense and how high he's been on James Wiseman, I think James Wiseman to me is going to get more priority because Troy was so invested into James Wiseman. Like we've talked about it before, if the Pistons get a top 3 pick in the 2020 draft, Troy Weaver's drafting James Wiseman. That's how highly Troy Weaver thinks of James Wiseman. He did obviously trade for Marvin Bagley after the Bull trade did get rescinded because of health concerns with Bull. But I think there's a role for Bagley on this team. But to your point, like the awful defense, yeah, Bagley could, not play. It could just be sitting on the bench because of Monty's decision not to play him. Because maybe you're versing a team that is just going to cook you in the post, and you need someone to lock it down. And I think James Wiseman, even though I've told you he's 7'1", but he rebounds like he's 6'1", he's still 7'1".
Yeah,
and he showed some promise at the end of the year of blocking some shots, and I was really impressed with the summer league action of him dominating in the summer league. So to answer your question, I think James Wiseman will probably get more playing time, but I think to me they're interchangeable. I think it's just going to be a battle in training camp to see who edges each other out in the rotation. But I don't know, man. I haven't seen a preseason game. I haven't even seen a practice yet. I'm hoping the Pistons do the open practice because I haven't been to one of those in a minute. That'll tell me a lot what I need to know with the rotations and how Monty plans to use this team. But preseason can't come soon enough. Open practice can't come soon enough. We're so close to it, man.
Yeah, I also think another reason we'll see James Wiseman is because he wants to play the 5. Bagley does not. And I mean, I'm sure Bagley would if they said, look, this is the only spot we have for you. But that's why I'm so interested in seeing Duren starting, Isaiah Stewart coming off the bench in that 4-5 role, getting minutes at the 5, but then also going small at the 4 with Bojan, Livers, or Joe Harris, or even Ausar. I would like to see something like that. But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. I have said Wiseman to me, and I know we're done with the podcast, but I've always said Wiseman, when you watch him I want you guys to go watch him rebound, man. He'll just stand up and he's like this, trying to grab the basketball, and you're like, dude, what are you doing? You're 7'1", jump for it. It's the wildest thing to me. Maybe it's not something he's used to of jumping up for rebounds because he's always been taller than his opposition, but bro, he rebounds like me. I'm only 6'1". I can't jump for shit. My knees are shot. But I'd love to see him just be like an Andre Drummond out there and just jump up and grab that board and just secure it.
He really has no motor for it, man. I think you're right. I think he fell victim to being so tall and where he's playing against, a lot of probably 6'7", 6'8", 6'9" guys. Those guys aren't exactly short, but when you're 7'1", and you're playing in high school, even in college, most of the time, you're the tallest player on the floor, where you don't have to jump for a rebound. You don't really have to give that much effort because you tower over everybody. And I think that's the case with James Wiseman. If he could show just a little bit of effort and fight on the defensive On the rebounding, he'd probably be closer to being a starter in today's NBA than, being questioned if he could be like a third string center or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm hopeful for him. Obviously, he's been hurt a lot, but
yeah,
that's like one thing when I watch him play, I'm like, dude, like, what are you doing? Like Isaiah Stewart, like he'll hustle for a rebound. Even Bagley will like try to hustle for like offensive rebounds. I just like watch him. I'm like, he's not gonna try, is he? But like I said, I'm just nitpicking at this point.
Yeah, it's almost like if you could give James Wiseman Isaiah Stewart's hustle, or even just give Isaiah Stewart James Wiseman's size and athleticism, you'd have a really special player. But unfortunately, both of those guys come with their cons to their game, and we haven't seen James Wiseman put it all together yet. Hopefully we do this season, though.
Yeah, I don't know. I know I'm just being picky at this point, but hey.
It's all good.
Thank you guys for watching for over 2 hours on the Pistons Talk Podcast. Lance is going to tell you guys where you guys can find it and give us a rating on, all these podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, and Google.
Yeah, thank you guys. First and foremost, follow me on Twitter at LanceCapros, and you get that count up a little bit. But thank you guys for listening to the Pistons Talk Podcast. Do us a favor, go to Google, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe. After you subscribe, leave a review, drop a rating, but more importantly, tell a Pistons fan.
Peace.